They don't pay much attention to the booth at the bottom of level 1. It's a good setup for me. I clock in at 10, I run the gate arm, I do my rounds every 2 hours with a flashlight, and I'm back in my chair by the time the city quits down. The vest they give you is a shade of orange that says nothing important is happening here. I've worn it 4 years and nobody from the upper floors has ever learned my name. That was fine. That was the arrangement. I had Ren's school drop-off covered, her pickup handled, Tuesday violin lessons, Thursday swim. The overnight shift was mine to trade for all of that. 22 years in the Army teaches you to sleep in pieces anyway. The night it happened was a Wednesday in October. I remember the temperature had dropped faster than the forecast said it would. I was on my second round, level 3, when I heard a car door and then nothing. No footsteps, no key fob, no elevator call. Just the sound of the wind through the open stairwell, and then a soft, heavy sound I knew before I could name it. She was on the concrete between her car and the wall. The car had stalled 2 feet from the pillar. She'd coasted to a stop and barely made it out. The door. I didn't know her name. I knew she was on the executive floor because of the reserved placard, but that was the extent of it. She was on her side, breathing in a way that told me her airway was clear, but the rhythm was wrong. Her phone was on the ground 2 feet away, screen cracked, battery dead. I called 911 on mine, and then I went to work the way you go to work when the work is the only thing that matters. I'd done it in conditions a lot worse than a concrete parking deck. I loosened the collar of her jacket, monitored the rhythm, kept her warm with the extra blanket I carry in my bag after a cold snap 3 winters ago that nobody else remembered. When she came around enough to be frightened, I told her quietly where she was, and that help was on the way, and I kept my hand on her wrist so she could feel that someone was there. The ambulance was there in 6 minutes. I gave them everything they needed and stepped back. I was about to go back to the booth when the elevator opened, and a man in a good suit came out, moving fast. He stopped when he saw me, saw her on the gurney, saw the paramedics. His eyes went to me and did the math I'd seen men do before. The worn vest, the flashlight, the dark lot, no witnesses standing behind me. What happened to her, he said, not a question. The tone of it was an accusation dressed in a suit. I told him she'd collapsed and I'd stayed with her until the ambulance arrived. He looked at the paramedics, then back at me. I'm calling security, he said, already reaching for his phone. And I'm calling our attorney. The paramedic closest to me, a young woman who'd been calm and efficient through the whole thing, glanced at him once and then looked at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. His name was Miles Pryor, VP of Strategic Development, as I found out later. He was 38 years old and had been with the company 4 years, which was the same amount of time I'd been in that booth. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes after he made his calls, not because they were dispatched on an emergency, but because Pryor had called a friend at the precinct and described a suspicious situation. I was asked to come in and give a statement. I said, of course. I asked one of the officers if I could make a call first. Ren answered on the second ring. She was 10, and she knew the sound of a late night before I said a word. You okay, Dad? I'm fine, I said. I have to go in and talk to some people for a little while. Mrs. Carver next door will sit with you. I'll be back before school. There was a pause. Did you help somebody? I thought about that. Yeah, Bug, I think so. Okay, she said, like that was the whole explanation, and it was enough. Maybe it was. The precinct was warm and they gave me coffee. I sat across from a detective named Okafor, who had the look of a man who'd been doing this long enough to hear most stories twice. I told him mine once, plain start to finish. What I heard, what I found, what I did, in what order. He wrote it down without interrupting. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me for a moment. You have any medical training? He asked. Some, I said. He nodded and left the room. I drank the coffee. I thought about Ren asleep on the couch at Mrs. Carver's with the television on low, the way she always fell asleep with one arm over her face. What I didn't know, sitting in that room, was that on the other side of the city, the ER attending who'd received the CEO was on the phone with the charge nurse, trying to figure out who had stabilized her. The positioning, the airway management, the improvised warmth protocol, none of it was what you'd expect from a bystander. It was what you'd expect from someone trained in austere medicine, the kind of medicine you practice when you're a long way from a hospital. And the patient can't wait. I also didn't know that the parking structure's cameras covered level 3 in full. The booth's security terminal recorded everything. And the building manager had pulled the footage before Pryor's attorney had even finished composing the letter he was planning to send. The footage showed 51 minutes of a man in an orange vest, kneeling on concrete, never leaving, doing everything right. Detective Okafor came back in with a second cup of coffee he set down in front of me without asking. He sat across from me again, and this time his manner was different. Quieter, more deliberate. "We pulled the footage," he said. "And the hospital called." I nodded. The attendings wanted to know who managed the airway before the paramedics got there. He opened his notebook again, but he wasn't reading from it. "I ran your background while you were sitting here." "I know," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Silver Star," he said. "That's not a small thing. It was a long time ago. 63 months of combat deployment across 2 theaters. 22 years total." He closed the notebook again. "You've been parking cars." "I've been raising my daughter," I said. "The parking cars part just paid for it." He was quiet for a moment, and then he almost smiled. "Mr. Cole, I need you to stay here about another 20 minutes while I make one more call. After that, you are free to go, and I'd like to personally apologize for the manner in which you were brought in." "You didn't bring me in," I said. "I came voluntarily." He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "you did. The call he made was to the hospital. The CEO, her name was Diana Harwell, as I learned from the news crawl on the precinct's wall-mounted television, had regained full coherence by midnight. She'd given her account to the hospital administrator, and then, according to what Okafor told me afterward, asked him for the name of the man who had stayed with her. The 20 minutes became 40. Pryor's attorney arrived at the precinct, made 2 inquiries, spoke to someone behind a closed door for about 8 minutes, and left without speaking to me. I watched him go from the hallway. He didn't look in my direction. At 2:15 in the morning, Detective Okafor walked me to the lobby, shook my hand, and told me he hoped the rest of the night was quiet. I told him I hoped so too. Outside, the air was cold and still, and the city was as close to silent as it ever gets. I called a car back to the structure to get my truck. Wren was asleep on the couch exactly as I'd pictured her. I covered her with the blanket from the back of the closet and sat in the armchair and let the quiet of the apartment settle over me. I thought about 22 years of getting to know what a human body needs when everything else has gone wrong. I thought about how you carry that without advertising it the way you carry any tool. Useful when it's needed, put away when it isn't. I was back in the booth by 6. The morning shift was mine through 10 on Thursdays, and I liked the early hours, the light coming sideways through the open levels, the city waking up street by street below, the air still cold enough that you could see your breath in the stairwell. I had a thermos of coffee and a paperback I'd been carrying for 2 weeks without reading much of it. The elevator opened at 7:42. She was moving carefully, the way you move when the medication is still doing some of the work. But her eyes were clear and steady. She was still in hospital clothes under a long coat someone had brought her. She walked toward the booth and stopped when she reached the window. "Garrett Cole?" she said, reading my name off the small placard above the gate controls that nobody from the upper floors had ever once looked at. "Miss Harwell," I said. She looked at the booth, the thermos, the paperback, the orange vest on the hook, and then she looked at me. "They told me what you did," she said. "The doctor said you probably saved my life." I thought about the right thing to say. "I did what needed doing," I said. "I'm glad you're standing here." She was quiet for a moment. There was something working in her expression, not grief exactly, more like the face that a person makes when they are revising something they thought they knew. "I owe you an apology," she said, for what Miles said. And did. "He was scared," I said. "He didn't know what he was looking at." She looked at me as if that answer surprised her. Maybe it did. "They showed me the footage," she said. "You never left." "No. 51 minutes on a concrete floor. The floor was the least of it." She almost laughed. The laugh caught, and she pressed her hand to her side and winced, and I stood up out of the chair because that's what you do. But she waved me off and steadied herself. "I'm told," she said, "that you spent 22 years in the Army and that you have a Silver Star that you didn't mention to anyone when the police brought you in. Didn't seem relevant. The detective thought it was." She paused. "I thought it was." Across the lot, I could hear the first cars of the morning starting to come up the ramp. The light was fully up now, flat and white, and somewhere 4 floors below a city bus was making the turn onto Decatur Street. Normal Thursday, the same as every Thursday. "Wren gets out of school at 3:15, I said. "I'm here through 10. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Is there anything I can do for you, Mr. Cole?" I thought about it honestly. "A working coffee machine on level 1 would be appreciated," I said. "The one by the elevator's been broken since March." That time, she did laugh carefully, and it stayed in her eyes after it left her face. She reached into the coat pocket and set a card on the ledge of the window. "When Wren's a little older," she said, "and if you ever want something more than the booth, you call that number, not the main line. That one." She said it without pity and without condescension. She said it the way you say something true and leave it where the other person can pick it up when they're ready. I watched her go to the elevator. She pressed the button and waited, and just before the doors opened, she turned and looked back at the booth. I raised a hand. She raised hers. The elevator closed. I picked up the card and looked at it once, and put it in the breast pocket of the vest, next to my ID and the small photograph of Wren at her last violin recital, the one where she'd played the whole piece from memory and looked surprised at the end that it had worked. Downstairs, Miles Pryor had been in Diana Harwell's office since 6:30 that morning. I only know what the building manager told me later, that the meeting lasted 11 minutes and that Pryor had left carrying a box and hadn't badged back in. I poured the last of the coffee from the thermos, opened the paperback to the page I'd stopped at, and raised the gate for the first car of the morning. The booth was the same as it always was. So was I. But something had been named that hadn't been named before, and that felt, in the quiet of the morning, like enough.